Clark Gable's grave shows that he never fully healed from the terrible accident. Clark Gable was a famous actor during Hollywood's golden age. He was so popular, talented, and powerful on screen that he was often called the King of Hollywood. He was born on February 1, 1901, in Cadiz, Ohio, as William Clark Gable. He came from nothing to become one of the most famous stars in American movies. It took him a while to become famous, as Gable had to go through years of hardship and failure before he finally found success. It made his rise even more impressive. Over the course of his career, Gable showed a mix of tough masculinity, charm, and sensitivity that made both viewers and his peers admire him. Early in his life, Clark Gable faced many difficulties that made him into the person he would become. When he was only 10 months old, his mother died, leaving him to be raised by his father. William Henry Gable works as an oil driller. Gable was greatly affected by his father's rough-hewn way of life and blue-collar work ethic. Gable dropped out of high school and did a variety of odd jobs as a teenager, such as on a farm and in a factory, to make money. Even though his early years were not very happy, Gable has always been interested in culture, especially the theater. Gable chose to follow his dream of becoming an actor when he was in his early 20s, a goal that, given his background, seemed almost impossible to reach. In the early 1920s, Gable went to Hollywood, but it was hard for him to get ahead in the business. While he was learning acting and getting better at being on stage, he worked as an actor in traveling shows and small films. His early attempts to make movies didn't work out, and casting agents thought Gable looked too rough for leading man parts at first, but he wouldn't give up, and in the end he got better at what he did by working hard to improve his playing. His hard work paid off when talent agents found him and signed him to MGM Studios. He went on to become one of the biggest stars of the 1930s and 1940s there. In 1931, Clark Gable got his big break when he played the lead in A Free Soul with Norma Shearer. People went crazy for him when he played a charming but dangerous gangster. It even caught the attention of the biggest names in Hollywood. MGM Studios quickly saw that Gable had the makings of a star and started giving him bigger parts. His commanding appearance, deep voice, and natural charm on screen made him a favorite of both men and women. After Gable's big break with A Free Soul, she had a string of other big hits, such as Red Dust, in 1932. One night in 1934 and 1935, there was a mutiny on the Bounty. Gable's most famous role was in Frank Capra's love comedy, It Happened One Night, for which he received a lot of praise. As a down-on-his-luck writer who helps a spoiled heiress, Gable showed how versatile he was as an actor. The movie did well at the box office thanks to his funny timing and easy charm. Notably, Gable won the Academy Award for Best Actor for his work in the movie, solidifying his role as a Hollywood main man. His part in It Happened One Night also changed the romantic comedy genre by combining humor with real emotional link between the characters. Clark Gable's career hit its peak in 1939, when he played Red Butler in Gone with the Wind, which is one of the most famous and loved movies ever made. Based on the book by Margaret Mitchell, the movie takes place in the United States during the Civil War and Reconstruction. Gable plays a handsome but morally ambiguous Southern gentleman who falls in love with Vivien Leigh's fiery Scarlett O'Hara. Gable's performance as Red Butler is still one of the most famous in movie history, and his line "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn" is one of the most remembered lines in movie history. The movie Gone with the Wind was a huge hit. It did well at the box office and with critics, and it cemented Gable's status as a legendary character. Even though Gable didn't want to play Red Butler at first, his act became the model for all other leading men in Hollywood. The movie won several Oscars, including Best Picture, and Gable's role as Red Butler made him famous all over the world. His chemistry with Vivien Leigh was electric, and the movie's big-budget, epic scale, and lasting themes of love, loss, and strength helped Gone with the Wind become an important part of culture for many generations of viewers. Even though Gone with the Wind was the peak of Gable's career, he continued to star in hit movies in the 1940s and 1950s. But disaster often happened in his personal life. Gable married his third wife, actress Carole Lombard, in 1939. Sadly, she died in a plane crash in 1942 on her way back from a war bond tour. Gable was heartbroken when she died, and soon after he joined the U.S. Army Air Forces. During World War II, he was an officer and an aerial gunner. Gable's service in the war won him respect from his peers and the public, which added to the idea that he was both strong and weak. When the war was over, Gable went back to Hollywood. His movies in the 1940s and 1950s were good, but not as good as the ones he made before the war. During this time, movies like The Hucksters 1947, Me Gambo 1953, and Run Silent Run Deep 1958 are well known. His popularity stayed the same, but Hollywood was changing, and even though Gable was still a big star, it was getting harder for him to deal with how the movie business was changing. Even so, his lasting charm, skill and hard work ethic kept making him a popular movie star. The Misfits, directed by John Huston and written by Arthur Miller, was Gable's last movie part. It was in 1960. With Marilyn Monroe and Montgomery Clift, the movie was a sad look at getting older and the end of the Old West. It had many of the same themes as Gable's own career. Gable tragically died of a heart attack not long after shooting The Misfits, on November 16, 1960. His death put an end to a time in Hollywood, as Gable was one of the last big stars in the studio era. A visit to Clark Gable's gravesite is a moving reminder of the deep sadness and grief he felt throughout his life, much of which came from a terrible personal loss he never fully got over. Behind closed doors, Gable was a man who felt haunted by loss. He was known as the King of Hollywood for his iconic parts and charming screen presence. His grave, it is in Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, and it tells a story that goes much deeper than that of a famous movie star. This picture represents a man who is very sad. On January 16, 1942, Gable's beloved wife Carole Lombard died in a plane crash on her way back from a World War II bond gathering. This was the terrible event that changed his life forever. Gable's third wife Lombard was also his true love. Their marriage had been full of love, fun, and a strong emotional bond, and his grief over her sudden, untimely death was unbearable. The plane Lombard was on, a TWA Flight 3, crashed into Nevada's Potosi Mountain, killing all 22 people on board. At the time, Gable was looking forward to her coming back to their home in Encino, but the news that she was gone for good broke his heart. Following Lombard's death, Gable was unable to calm down. People who knew him before the accident said he was never the same after it. It was said that he never fully recovered from the loss of Lombard because his sadness was so great. He became less lively and charming, and he turned to work to feel better. He threw himself into movie parts and eventually joined the U.S. Army Air Forces as a way to deal with his grief. Some people think Gable's decision to fight in the war was more than just a show of patriotism, but also a way for him to get away from the pain of losing Lombard, as if he thought the risks of war would help him forget how sad he was. Gable went back to Hollywood after World War II, but the death of Lombard kept following him around. He got married again twice, but neither time seemed to make him as happy as his marriage to Lombard. In his later years, he seemed sad, and people who knew him well said that Gable never stopped missing the woman he had lost. Even in his professional life, where his acts were still praised, there was a hint of sadness in them. His love for acting faded, and his pain was clear. Gable's famous part as Red Butler in Gone with the Wind and his other movies showed how talented he was. Behind the scenes though, the man changed in a terrible way. At age 59, Gable died of a heart attack in 1960. It wasn't a surprise that he decided to be buried next to Carole Lombard. The fact that his grave is only a few feet away from hers in the Sanctuary of Trust area of Forest Lawn shows how much he loved her. Their simple final resting places, which are marked with plates with their names on them, are very different from how famous and glamorous they were in real life. In death, Gable was reconnected with the woman who had meant the most to him, which suggests that she was still in his thoughts as he died. Since then, fans of both Gable and Lombard have made the gravesite their holy ground, coming to honor not only Hollywood royalty, but also a love story that lived on after death. Many people think that the fact that Gable chose to be buried next to Lombard shows that he never fully got over her death. His movies and reputation as one of the best players in Hollywood history will always be remembered, but his personal heartbreak story is an important part of who he is. No amount of fame, wealth, or professional success could fill the hole left by Lombard's death. His grave is a somber reminder of that. People who visit Gable's grave decades after he died are still moved by the story of how he dealt with his sadness. It's a sad reminder of the man behind the myth of the King of Hollywood. Many ways, Clark Gable's gravesite represents the most important truth about his life, that he was at his heart, even though he was famous and accomplished, a man who had loved deeply and tragically lost someone. His failure to get better after the accident that killed Lombard is a sad part of his story that reminds us that behind every Hollywood legend is a real person who is hurting. Lombard's and Gable's graves are always there to tell us that some wounds never heal, and some loves never fade.